All right, thank you, Zach. Yes, as Pastor Richards is saying, there's this handout tonight. And so what you have there with that handout is really my complete presentation. I've left you off the hook, made it easy for you, that you don't have to fill out any blanks and get confused and say, oh, what was the answer to number 3 and all that kind of stuff. You have everything that I'm going to be covering right in front of you. And my intent tonight is not to frustrate you, but I am going to confess on the front end, this might be like you're drinking out of a fire hose tonight, because I'm going to be sharing, a lot. I'm not going to be covering everything in minute detail as far as what you have there. It's really designed that you can later on go back and go through this, take your time, look up verses, all those kinds of things that might be helpful to you in working your way through this topic. If there's anything that I hope you'll take away from this evening is really, and I've really tried to make this, even though there's a lot of material here, as simple as possible. And by that, I mean really having an understanding between the distinction between discouragement and depression. That distinction alone has helped me tremendously in handling this topic matter personally in my own struggles that I have, just like we all have. This topic really was of interest to me for some time, and I'm not saying that I have the corner on this. A lot of good people have taken this subject and dealt with it. There's a variety of ways that you can look at it. And as I said, I'm not saying I have the corner on it. I have done a little bit of homework on this, and so I am comfortable with what I'm sharing with you. But this goes back years ago. I was asked to share this topic with a bunch of women at one of our state fellowships women's conference, and so that was really the first time I developed this presentation. And at the end of it, I had two ladies from our church who we had counseled share their testimony of their journey through very, very significant seasons of depression and how God brought them through that. And it was a really, really good time, a helpful time. And then from that, I've used it in a variety of other applications. I was the chaplain of our police department in Batavia for 22 years, and I did professional development workshops regularly, and I taught this topic to the officers. I used to have, you might say, a side gig, if you want to put it that way. I had a funeral director friend who developed this little company to help funeral directors have professional development workshops in light of and credits for their ongoing accreditation. And he asked me to do several things, and I shared this topic with funeral directors. Very interesting. Where do funeral directors go in living in a world of difficulty and hardship? It was very interesting and a good time with them. I've shared this with my own congregation, and then in our church back at Grace, we have a biblical counseling ministry, and I've taught that several times there. And so what we want to do tonight is just unpackage these topics, and I trust that it will be helpful for you. You ever been there where you just feel so low that, like I said this morning, you could dangle your feet over a sheet of paper? Your defenses are worn out because of the burden of struggle, whatever it might be, and you are just done. I mean, you're done. You're just exhausted with that. There's an old fable about the devil who was going to go into retirement. And so he was having a yard sale, and he put out all his wares, all his vices for sale. And he had ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, all these things out there that were marked for sale. But there is one strangely shaped device that was labeled not for sale. And someone said, how come that particular vice is not for sale? And he said, I can get by with any of these other without any of these other vices. But that one vice I need, because with that issue, I can work my way into people's lives and get them to do things that they normally would never do. And the name of that tool was discouragement. Discouragement. And so enter Psalm 42 and 43. This is where we'll be primarily spending our time here. And again, as we look at verses in these passages, we're not going to be exegeting it verse by verse. We're just going to be highlighting things. You can look at it in more detail just simply because of time here. But what Psalm 42 and 43 do is that it highlights, they address a particular wilderness experience that's inevitable to all of us. And it's a wilderness, one that one theologian called the believer's chief occupational hazard. And that hazard is the wilderness of discouragement. And I think we can all say it's something that we struggle with. Interestingly, Psalm 42 and 43 are classified as individual lament psalms. Various psalms are categorized in different ways. And as an individual lament psalm, these chapters reflect the genuine spiritual plight of an individual, of people that are still living today, of you and me. And what we see, these psalms move from near despair to renewed confidence as they show the antidote to the dilemma of discouragement that we can find ourselves in. And so what we want to first do is understand this fact, that we see the Bible, and these chapters in particular, not sugarcoating anything, not glossing over it, not saying, oh man, if you were really godly, you wouldn't have these kind of problems. That's not the case at all. It portrays the fact that discouragement is very real. Have you ever had somebody say to you, oh, don't be discouraged? Well, they're well-meaning when they say that, okay? But guess what? Sometimes you just can't help but be discouraged. I mean, your house just burned down, or whether you lost your job, or whatever might have happened, and it's very, very real. And what's important that you understand that discouragement, it's not a sign that you've been forsaken, but rather it's an indicator that you live in a very broken world that is not functioning the way God originally designed it to function. That is ultimately called heaven. And until that time, we're going to be dealing with all kinds of brokenness, and discouragement is a very real issue that we can't deny. And so what we want to do is just walk our way through these features that we see here articulated in these Psalms of what discouragement looks like. Let's note these features. First of all, your tank is empty. And it's interesting, the imagery here is of a deer being hounded, a deer being chased, where it starts out there in verse 1, as the deer pants for the water brooks, so pants my soul for you. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. He's longing for a sense of spiritual renewal. You're empty, you're spent. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe that's the way you entered into this room here this evening, that you're thinking to yourself in light of what burdens you're carrying, man, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I don't know how much longer I can continue to keep living on fumes because my tank's empty. Note also your tears are flowing. Look at verse 3 there. He says, my tears have been my food day and night. Instead of eating regularly, he's crying regularly. My wife and I walk. We try to walk or ride our bikes every morning, Monday through Friday, sometimes on Saturday as well. We take Sundays off. But we try to do that, and a lot of times we talk. And about 2 years ago, we were going through a really rough patch in light of some situations that were just very, very difficult. And some mornings as she was talking and processing what we were going through, she would be weeping. Some mornings as we would be talking and I would be talking, I would be weeping. Why? Because we were discouraged. We were trying to process this. And the reality of tears is something that you can't deny. You got to let them flow or else you're going to explode. You're going to pop. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very real dynamic. Note there, your trouble is long. Verse 4, he says this, when I remember these things, I pour out my soul within me. For I used to go with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God with a voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept a pilgrim feast. Now, what he's processing here is simply this. He's deeply troubled by the recollection of the times of blessing and celebration known in days gone by. And the psalmist, he's been living in isolation from the place of God's blessing, and he couldn't experience God's presence in the unique comfort of corporate worship that gave him. And so he had been absent from that. And because of that, his trouble was very long. It's very interesting. Oftentimes, with people who are discouraged, what's the first thing that goes? Church. Church, you know? They stop coming to church. They stop coming to the very thing that can encourage them along the way the most. It's very fascinating, and we see this. Also here, your turmoil is compounding. In verse 5 and following, we won't read all these verses, but he says with this question, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? The word cast down, and he's repeating it here many times. Why are you cast down? It's talking about a statement of fact. Why are you so down? And the imagery here is one of compounded turbulence as problem gives way to problem and pressure builds upon pressure. Your turmoil is compounding. My mother-in-law, she's now with the Lord, but a few years ago she was in a nursing home and was experiencing, the loss of various capacities in the course of time. And her mobility was she had a couple of hip surgeries and stuff, and in the course of time, she just couldn't move anymore. And so she got this scooter. And so she was trying to, learn it and such. And I remember my wife and my daughter were visiting. And so I took it out in the hallways for this test drive, man. I was going like 90 miles an hour through this nursing hall. Bugs are getting stuck on my teeth, and stuff. And it was fun, It was fun zipping around in this thing. But you know what? My mother-in-law hated that thing. It had some toggle switch to work it, and it was confusing to her. She hated that. Why? Because it wasn't a joyride for her. It was mobility for her, and it just was one more problem on another problem. And so we see that articulated there. Your turmoil is compounding. And then finally here, you're taunted with doubt. Verse 10 there, where it says, as with a breaking of my bones, my enemies reproach me while they say to me all day long, where is your God? You quit believing that God is good, that he's good. And the taunts here, though, they're not atheistic in light of what they're expressing, but they're accusatory in light of their relationship with God, like with Christ, when he was on the cross. Remember, he was taunted, and they said, he trusted in God. Let God deliver him. And so you're taunted with doubt. And so this is what we see here in Psalm 42 as it portrays the very real fact that discouragement is real. But we go on, and next we want to look at now from this dynamic of discouragement to the fact that depression, I really believe, scripturally is something a little bit different, and depression, what we see taught here, is resistible. It's so important that you understand. Sometimes, and we'll be talking about this, you hear that word depression and you think it's some mysterious blue funk that somehow mysteriously hovers over you and then settles on you, and you can't do anything about it. Well, that's not what we see articulated here in this psalm. And it's important, as I said earlier, that we learn the difference between discouragement and depression, and that it is resistible. I used to serve as an advisory council member at ABWE, the Association of Baptists for World Evangelism, and one of the things that we did in that capacity, we'd listen to missionaries coming back from the field. And one time I remember this woman coming back. I remember her name even. She was in Africa, and I've been to Africa. It was in Western Africa, and that is a rough, rugged, barren, harsh environment. And that's where they had been serving. And she was talking about the struggles, and she said this: we were fighting for joy. We were fighting for hope. You see, she was portraying this dynamic of how depression truly can be resistible. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, what you need to do is you need to put on your thinking cap, okay? You need to put on your thinking cap, and you need to discern the difference between some very important truths. First of all, you need to discern the difference between neutral factors that you can be experiencing, things that can't help. You can't help. They just happen, okay? Just quickly looking at the physical conditions, illness that puts you behind in your work, you know, and you feel things mounting up because of that, all right? You can't help that. Hormonal changes, very real issue. Exhaustion and sleep loss. Sleep is absolutely critical to helping you with the struggle of depression, and not having proper sleep is very, very important. Medications. My dad had congestive heart failure, and he was on various medications that, as the side effects, one of them was quote unquote depression. And I remember him saying to my mother, "Oh, Betty, man, I'm just so depressed." I mean, he was just so depressed. Why? This medication. It was a very real side effect of what he was taking there. Improper nutrition, absolutely true. And exercise, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Climate. When I first moved up to Western New York, I came from Virginia, and there was this guy who would whine about the winter weather and no sunshine, you know, gray skies for 3 months, you know, and he would whine about that. I never said this to him. I'm thinking, you wuss, you know, just get over it. Just stop whining, you know. So what, you know, the sun's not shining. Until I lived here a few years. Then I realized what it's like. You know, my son now lives down in Florida. Guess what we do in January and February? I go down to Florida, because there is nothing like sunshine and palm trees and warm weather and parrots flying around, you know, in the middle of winter. It really can affect you. It's very fascinating. Reversal of fortunes, like I mentioned, you know, you'll lose your job or things like that happening. Adjusting to change, I mean, that can be a very real issue. You know, even I've talked about retirement a lot. You know, you lose your sense of purpose, and that was your identity, and all those kinds of things. It's real. Victimization, that goes without saying. So those are some neutral factors. You need to see those things. You need to recognize them for what they are. But there's also some very real negative factors. And these are things that can be helped. And this is the crux of it. This is what's important. What are we talking about? Things like self-pity, where we're just, oh me, oh my, and it's just all this introspecting and moaning. Nursing a grudge, you know, where you just won't let go of something, and you're holding on to that. You know, gripe sessions, brooding. Some people have a PhD in brooding. You know what brooding is? Brooding is allowing that which is past and no longer exists except in my mind make me miserable today. That's what brooding is. Some people are great at that, you know. They allow something that's in the past no longer exists, and they allow that to make themselves just miserable in the present. going on. Laziness, where you just stop doing what you need to do, what you can do. Overeating, again, we'll talk about that. A refusal to eat, where you just stop eating. Bitterness is just, you keep hitting the repeat button that says, you hurt me, you hurt me, you hurt me. That's bitterness. Putting off decisions, where you got to do something and you got to do it, but you just keep putting it off and you put it off and you put it off, and that anxiety doesn't go away automatically. It's always there. Envy, and then enslaving habits, and so we could go on and on. You need to discern that things that can't be helped, but then things that can be helped, and that's very, very important. Language factors, and this is where, again, discerning the difference between discouragement and depression. You need to treat the word depression like a loaded gun. How do you treat a loaded gun? Very carefully, don't you? Very carefully. And you need to discern that and treat that word very carefully in light of what we're going to see here moving forward with this. Note here, the very first diagnosed case of depression that we see in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 4. It's with the story of Cain and Abel and what went down with them, where Cain's sacrifice was rejected. And because of that, here's where we pick up the story. So Cain was very angry because of that, and his face fell. Very interesting. I love Hebrew. Hebrew is very vivid, it's very colorful in how it portrays the human condition. His face fell. What's it like when you're depressed? Ugh. Isn't that the true case? His face fell. He was like that. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted?" And interesting, that word literally means, will your face not be lifted up? If you do what's right, he said, you'll feel better. Your face will be lifted up. And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. And so he's talking about his need to take himself in hand and to do the next right thing no matter how he feels. Very important truth. And so here the important principle is set forth that behavior determines feelings. Behavior determines feelings. See, depression is often the feeling that comes after a loss. And what happens when we experience a loss? We experience the emotion of sorrow. And so what is depression? It's sorrowing without hope. Someone once said this: be careful how you muse and what you choose when you lose. Be careful how you muse and what you choose, the response that you choose when you lose. It's a great truth that really is simple and yet very helpful. Let's look at it in light of the statement that we have here by Jay Adams. He said this: it's vital to understand the important difference between being perplexed, disappointed, blue, physically weak, or even feeling low because of guilt, and being depressed. All of us get down. We are all blue from time to time. We all become discouraged. However, that is not depression. Depression comes when we fail to handle the blues, the perplexity, the disappointment, the physical affliction, or the guilt the right way. Depression comes from a process in which the initial problem is mishandled in such a way that it's enlarged and eventually plunges you into despair. And so we see this truth illustrated in the diagram that you have here. And this diagram is, I think, very, very helpful. And we'll just go through it rapidly here, but you got a problem. And let's just say, for sake of illustration, you had a hard day at work. And so you come home and your wife tells you something that you just weren't ready for. You didn't like what she said, whether she wasn't meaning anything of it, but you just took it one way, and so you snap at her. And so what does she say to you? Oh, thanks so much. That's just exactly what I wanted to hear from you, honey. And she comes over and kisses you. No, you just hurt her, okay? And so did that solve the problem, your response? No, because now you've got two problems with that incorrect response. You still got that work issue, and now you've got a hurt spouse. And you hurt her because of how she's responding and what you said. But, you don't do anything about it. And so does that solve the problem? No. It creates an additional complicating problem. With when you mishandle that one with an incorrect response. And so now you either avoid her or you distract yourself with, you medicate yourself in a variety of ways with food, with alcohol. You immerse yourself in Netflix and even pornography, all kinds of go-tos that people can have in handling I just want to get away from all this stuff with an incorrect response. Does that solve the issues? No. It creates a whole new set of problems because now you still have that work issue. You still got the hurt spouse. You've got now the distance between you and the guilt. And all of that results in these negative feelings that I believe accurately and biblically we can call depression. And this might sound arrogant, okay, but I don't let myself say I'm depressed. I rarely, if ever, say I'm depressed. You know why? Because if I hear myself saying I'm depressed, I know I'm mishandling issues into my life. And it really forces me, in light of discouragement that I'm discouraged about, to nip it in the bud right off the bat with the right response, so that it doesn't start this negative downward spiral that will result in additional complicating problems. This is for me, it's simply profound. Because like I said, will I get discouraged? Absolutely. And I can come through some issues, but man, I tell you what, I fight that tooth and nail. And sometimes I don't like that battle, but you know what? I'm not gonna allow myself to go down this and to complicate things with wrong responses. And this has really helped me, and I trust it'll awaken you to what can be in your life. And so Adams goes on to say this: stir together in one pot a setback, sickness, disappointment, guilt over unconfessed sin, whatever it might be. Failure to handle the setback the right way. A tendency to follow feeling rather than to pursue obligation, and the willingness to participate in pity parties, and you have all the essential ingredients for that tasty, thick stew of depression. And so, again, here we have another way of looking at this with these diagrams here. The downward spiral, when I keep mishandling either negative issues or neutral issues, it just creates additional complicating problems that just, whelm up in me, and I just become overwhelmed with them. And that's when I go into this funk, these bad feelings of depression. But that's what it looks like when I handle issues my way. But here's the beauty of the scriptures. There's a better way. It's God's way, where I can learn correct responses to these negative issues, and as I start knocking off these problems, they begin to eliminate themselves one by one, and I feel my hope rising as I'm dealing with things the right way, and those problems are reduced. It's a very interesting reality. Let me just use it very simply. I'll go through this. Let's just say, for sake of illustration, and not to stigmatize, but for a housewife, in light of the statement on the left here. Let's just say you hate ironing, and you've got this big pile of ironing to do, and so you just, oh man, I don't want to do this ironing, And so the incorrect response is, well, you get on the phone, you talk to your girlfriend, Susie May, and so you talk to Susie May for an hour, and then you hang up the phone, and lo and behold, the ironing fairies were out for that hour, and all your ironing is done. No, because now what you have is not only do you have this pile of ironing there, but you also have ironing and a whole bunch of dishes that you got to do. And so, oh man, you don't really want to do that. And so what you do, you turn on the TV and you watch TV for, a couple hours. And then when you're done watching TV, lo and behold, both the ironing and the dish fairies were out. And all that work is done and cleaned up. No. Because now what you have is not only the ironing and the dishes, but you've got more laundry to do. And so then what do? You go out and you go shopping, you stop, you keep avoiding these things, and you're just so burdened down because of those things. That's the left side. The right side would be, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to iron for 20 minutes. And lo and behold, you iron for 20 minutes, you get things done. Oh, wow, look at that, So you iron a little bit longer, and you get it all done. And what do? Man, you feel better. Say, okay, I'm going to stand here at this sink, and I'm going to wash these dishes until it's done. So, it takes you 45 minutes, you work through it all, and you get everything all wiped up. What? You feel better, And then you tackle another chore, and what happens? You feel better. Your hope alleviates as you tackle those things. That's I know it's very simplistic, but I'll tell you what, it is so true when you handle that and deal with that in these kinds of things, of handling various other issues as well. And so depression is resistible. How is that? And we're going to just fly through this here. And so how is it resistible? Well, the real-life case study in Psalm 42 and 43 is simply this. First of all, I command my will. Years ago, we had the privilege to see my daughter and son-in-law who were out visiting in Colorado, and he had a really neat Jeep that they would go up these mountain trails. I never did this before, but it was fascinating. See that big boulder in front of the Jeep? That was like a medium-sized boulder that we would crawl over. I had no idea that Jeep had the capacity. We didn't go around boulders, we went over boulders. It was phenomenal. I never realized a vehicle like that had the capacity to do that. Here's the beauty of it. You have no idea the capacity that you have as a blood-bought child of God to go over some of the boulders in your life, because of what God can do in and through you in handling these things. And so I command my will. How do I do that? By asking the right questions. And all through this here, in the Hebrew, and asking the questions, he's not saying, oh, why am I like this? It's active interrogation here. He's saying, why are you bowing down to some of these things rather than to God? Why are you allowing the difficulty to take the place of God? Why are you disquieted? why you're clamoring? You're whining and complaining, he says, that's seeing the problem bigger than God. And so he's commanding his will by asking the right kind of questions. Why are you letting this thing be such an issue in your life? Also, by praising God. It's fascinating there in verse 5, the latter part there, where he says this, hope in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. The other year, there was an early snowfall, and 3 of my grandkids that live in Stafford woke up, and they were stunned by seeing the snow. And my daughter wrote down what they were saying. It's like a gift from God, heaven. I think it's a world gift from Jesus for our birthdays. Praise Jesus Christ. Hallelujah. I can't believe we're in winter. It's not actually winter. It's just a gift of God. It's not the season yet. Praise Jesus Christ. Let's get our clothes on and go outside. I mean, where did they get this from? Where did they get this response to something like snow? They learned this because this was being poured into them by parents. And so the more you commit yourself to counting your blessings, the more you'll have eyes to see the specific blessings in your life. You also see in commanding your will, you remember God. And in verse 6 here, he says, "Oh my God, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore I will remember you." And so he uses the tool of memory to dispel the sense of the absence of God. And then as well, by speaking to God. And what we have here is very frank, very candid transparency. He's not sugarcoating things, man. He's calling it as he sees it, even though he might not be really accurate in it. But he's transparently communicating with God. Don't be afraid to transparently talk to God in the midst of your struggles. And so depression is resistible in the fact that you command your will. You also control your mind. And this is what's so important. This is something that we as believers can do. And all through this here, we see the psalmist is repeating certain things, that God is the God of his life. He is his stability, his rock. He is his hope. And repeatedly here, it's the theme, hope in God, hope in God. You see, hope is the sound knot at the end of the rope that you're clinging to that keeps you from sliding off into nowhere. And the point simply is that your hope is never fortified by reviewing your health and condition. Your hope is always fortified by reviewing God's health and condition. And he talks about that he is praising God for the help of his countenance that is also now the help of my countenance right here, right now. God, you are my exceeding joy, he says. And see, joy is this. Joy is not this light and fluffy feeling that it's a happy-go-lucky feeling. I really believe biblical joy is this. It's a deep-seated sense of satisfaction knowing that God is in control. That's what joy is. And so he's controlling his mind by focusing on those realities. And then also depression is resistible that we see here in how I calm my emotions. How do I do that? Well, I bask in God's love and I sing in the dark. I realize that God's love has me covered 24/7. 24/7, day and night. His steadfast, loyal love embraces me, and his song is with me. You know, someone has once said that your true religion is what you do in your solitude. Your true religion is what you do in your solitude. And this is what we see, the psalmist calming his emotions. And I've told you this before, when I was contemplating, retirement, I was really going through some times of anxiety. And I remember how just focusing on some of these things, God just really used that to settle and calm my emotions in focusing on these truths that we're looking at right here. And so, last point here, can you get out? Can you stay out of depression? Well, I really believe you can. And here's what we need to watch out for. First of all, watch out for inadequate substitutes. The first thing here is accepting a hopeless label. Oftentimes the only thing that the world can do is give you a label. You're a this or you're a that. And one of the labels oftentimes that they'll give you is you are clinically depressed, okay? Now, it's very interesting when you talk about what do you think of when you hear that word clinically depressed. I've asked that question. People say, my brain's fried. I'm just, it's a heavy word. But what's interesting is when you unpack what they mean with clinically depressed. And years ago, I got on the internet and looked at it, and there was an information sheet. And when you looked at the features of being clinically depressed, guess what it was? The very same thing that we talked about earlier, neutral factors, things that can't be helped, negative factors, things that can be helped. Things that are just matters of understanding and the need to process correctly. And so you could find out on this website if you're clinically depressed by clicking on the things that were affecting you. And so I just randomly, clicked on, I think, 4 of them. You need to have at least 5 to be classified as clinically depressed in this little test. And all of these things, whether they were neutral or negative, what they simply were mishandling those problems. A failure to cope. And yet you can be given this very weighty, heavy label that just leaves you right there. with no real solution to it. So you need to watch out for those hopeless labels. And then also thinking that the sole answer is in a pill. This is a big topic. We could spend the whole time on the whole thing with medication. And I don't advocate that, if you're a real spiritual Christian, you should, flush all your medication down the toilet. I don't advocate that. But what I do try to help people understand is what we see here in this little diagram. Here's the world's solution oftentimes. You've got problems, you're discouraged, and so you go to your doctor, you got these problems, you're mishandling them, let's just say for sake of illustration. You've got those bad feelings because of that. You go to your doctor and you tell him, and all he can do is write you a script. And so what oftentimes he'll say is this: you have a chemical imbalance. I know I'm brushing with a real wide brush here, okay, but this is a very common statement. You have a chemical imbalance, okay? And so he writes you a script. Now, here's the issue. What clinical biological test did he just give you in order to give you that diagnosis? Nothing. He just said, you've got a chemical imbalance. If you were having a problem with your ticker and you went to your cardiologist and say, Doc, my heart just is feeling funny lately. I don't know what it is. And if he said to you, okay, well, let's say, how about open heart surgery this coming Wednesday? You say, whoa. No, that's not the answer, Why? Because he didn't give you any defined test to come up with that diagnosis. But this is what our culture, this is the only answer our culture has. And so they'll prescribe a pill, and the pill might alleviate the bad feelings, okay? But it doesn't equip you with the coping mechanisms to respond in the right way. And so now your answer becomes reaching for that pill rather than learning how to handle the problems God's way. And it's very interesting, and again, I've dealt a lot with this. So many times people say with this medication, they don't like how it makes them feel. It doesn't really help with the negative feelings. And so the biblical goal, though, isn't to get people off medication. The biblical goal is to help people learn how to handle problems the right way so that ultimately the medication becomes unnecessary. And I've had that happen with multiple situations as they've worked their way through this. A lot more we could say, and I'm sorry if you wanted more, but there's more that can be studied there. How do you get out and stay out of depression? First of all, deal correctly with any wrong responses that might have triggered the bad feeling originally. Psalm 32, David's main contention is simply that hiding sin in his life caused distress, both of soul and body. Begin to do what's right, whether you feel like it or not. And this is so important, learning to practice repeated, disciplined responses no matter how you feel. So many times we'll find ourselves saying, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. You need to take yourself in hand, okay, and do the next right thing. Repeated, disciplined responses no matter how you feel. You see, the key is to not put the alleviation of depression first as your goal, but rather the desire to please God by doing what he says in the next right thing. Avoiding pity parties and gripe sessions. It's just going to keep you down in that pit. Challenge your thinking. Very, very important. Biblical thinking, Psalm 119, is self-talk that directs our minds away from thinking negatively. And so challenge your thinking. I have a good friend of mine back in our church who he shared with me in light of his struggles. Here's my problem, he says, I think destructively about people. I think destructively about people. And he knows it's wrong, but that's his go-to. And he has to he challenges himself to stop that and to not let that be his case. Know this, know that you have sufficient and superior guides. You have the scriptures. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. It's profitable, doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction. The Bible tells you what's right. It tells you what's wrong. It tells you how to make the wrong right, and it tells you how to keep it right. God hasn't left you to wander in the dark without the direction of His Word. And the indwelling work of the Holy Spirit, you have the third person of the triune Godhead resident in your life. You have Jesus Himself resident in your life who is helping you along the way, availing you of that opportunity, and that God has given you all things that pertain to life and godliness. Know that you have purpose. What's your purpose? Glorify God in your body. How do I do that? By proper diet, by proper exercise, by proper rest. I don't know about you, but some days my refrigerator talks to me. In particular, my freezer. Walk by, hey, Don, it's me, Perry's Ice Cream. Come on. I know it's 9:30 at night, but come on, just one bowl. Just one bowl, you know? Proper diet, I'll tell you what, that is so important. You know, garbage in, guess what, folks? Garbage out. And proper diet is so important. Proper exercise. I mentioned how my wife and I walk. You know, I'm 68 years old, and I work pretty diligently in trying to keep this hunk of flesh somewhat viable. And if I'm going to have any kind of sustainable value in using this hunk of flesh that God has for me, that I am to glorify Him in, you know, I need to take care of it. And so we exercise. We walk in the morning, and we have our devotions, and then I exercise. You know, after that, I spend about a half hour doing push-ups and other things. You know, I'm not trying to be Charlie Atlas. I want to stay viable. You know, I need my muscles. I never had very many to start with, but they're just fading away. You know. And so just maintaining that level of tone, exercise is absolutely critical to your well-being, and proper rest as well. A lot more we could say about that. Glorify God in your behavior through how? Discipline in your tasks, very important. You know, having those to-do lists and actually sticking with them and accomplishing them is very, very important as it pertains to understanding these truths. And as well, through discipline in your trust, in light of understanding that God is with you and God is helping you through this. So much more we could say here. Here's the dead-end dream where you're living this way. Man, if only I had this. If only that wasn't there. And here's the beauty of it. Here's where the eyes of faith comes in. It's so important you understand. The very thing that you think is breaking you, God has in your path to make you. He hasn't said oops with what's on your plate right now. And so be very careful what you're allowing yourself to say and to conclude. Here's what Spurgeon said: we are too prone to engrave our trials in marble and write our blessings in sand. Great statement. On the road to success, there are no shortcuts. I like that picture. You know, see, and I've said this before, our number one tendency when it comes to the difficulties and hardships of life is that we want the grace of release. Just get this out of here, rather than the grace of transformation. And so we're always looking for shortcuts, rather than allowing God to work in and through us in those situations. And so Psalm 42 and 43, they're not first and foremost about your discouragement. They're about God, and they're about His purpose to re-script your life. You see, He has so much more in store for you. That's why Jesus came down and is now resident in you. Why? To re-script your life so that you can be like Him. And so that you can be that one of a kind. Nobody else on this earth can be the testimony that you can be. by being a blood-bought, transformed believer by the grace of Jesus Christ as you allow him to refine you going through what you might be going through even now. He has arranged your struggle so that you would need his exact help, so that your life would be fused with his. I love this by John Newton. When you get to heaven, you will not complain of the way by which the Lord brought you. Great statement. Great, great statement. And so my counsel to you tonight is simply this. Let the process work. Let the process work. Just keep focusing on making it your aim to please God. Focus on doing the next right thing, no matter how you feel, okay? Because if you cave in to how you feel, it's not going to solve the problem, is it? It's going to create that, get that diagram blazoned in your mind. This is why I don't say I'm depressed. Because if I say I'm depressed, I know, man, I am not handling things the right way. I'm choosing the wrong things. And so I work hard at nipping it in the bud in light of working hard at right responses to avoid that, focusing on all the things that we've talked about and letting God be God in all these details. Well, like I said, I know this is a lot, and I hope it is helpful. There's a lot more that you can study if you'd review that again, and trust maybe that it scratched a little bit where it's itching. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness to us tonight. Thank you for these people. And I just pray for your special blessing. I pray for your special embrace as the God of all comfort, that you might encourage each and every heart, people that might be discouraged, people that might be depressed. God, help them to see that there's hope. There is hope. And that they would allow this season of what they're going through to be that which truly does conform them more into the image of Jesus. And so we look forward to testimonies of victory as we work hard at honoring you by doing the next right thing. And we'll thank you and praise you for it in Christ's name. Amen. All righty.